Well, obviously, Hurricane Ida, another example of the importance of the energy sector here in the United States. Seeing the power grid there in that region of the country have its issues brings forward the discussion once again about moving our energy sector ahead to be better prepared. And that's just one of the many touch points that our next guest has to deal with. That guest, by the way, just happens to be U.S. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm, who also was the former governor of the state of Michigan. Secretary Granholm, thanks very much for a few moments today.
You bet. Glad to be on.
So let's start there with New Orleans. And obviously, that's on the forefront of a lot of people's minds. I know the discussion around power grid is one that seemingly is talked about more and more. But this is, again, reinforcing how we need to be looking, I think, 20, 30, 40 years ahead on a lot of these pieces of what would fall under the category of infrastructure.
Yeah, totally. I mean, as you've really put your finger on it, every year we're seeing more and more of these extreme weather events, and we always build back, but often we build back the same stuff that we had before when we've really got to be thinking long term. We know these are going to continue to come down the pike. We spend right now about between 150 and 200 billion dollars every year building back after these big weather events, when if we invest right on the front side, we can invest in a resilient grid, for example, a resilient infrastructure that will lessen the cost over time and certainly prevent all of these outages. So part of the bipartisan infrastructure deal that is being considered in Congress has about $33.5 billion for that resiliency issue, resilient infrastructure, including transmission grid.
So how much of the building out of the grid right now is a level of partnership between the federal government and the state and local governments, and how much maybe even further does it need to go in the years ahead?
Well, actually, the build out of the grid right now, I mean, much of this infrastructure is all private sector, right? The federal government and the states, we permit it. But really it is being done by the private sector. So what we need to do is they see often, especially if they're public owned utilities, they have to have a return on their investment. And so they think much shorter term. So what this bipartisan infrastructure deal does, and the reconciliation bill that follows, is incentivize the utilities to be able to invest in a way that is resilient and that allows renewable energy. So we address climate change, right? And renewable energy to be mixed into the grid without passing any costs along to taxpayers. And I think that's the kind of thing that we need to do, is that partnership, a public-private partnership, to make sure that we build out what we need to build out for the future is critical.
So I guess to a degree, this builds out on the meeting at the White House about 2 weeks ago with the tech sector in terms of trying to continue to build out partnerships. When you think about how the energy sector has grown in recent years and the component of digital that is becoming more and more an element of the energy sector, how important it is to have that partnership with tech even in this process of building out energy.
Yeah, 1,000%, Dan. I mean, so really what we need to do is build out a grid that is resilient from weather, that has the capacity to be able to add all of the renewable energy that we need to add onto it, and that is resilient from cyber attacks. And so the cyber piece of things, now we get components from all over the world. Sometimes we may be getting them from countries, made in countries that don't have our best interests at heart. We want to make sure that the components for like smart grids and making sure that the grid itself is talking to one another so that we can direct power in the most efficient way, that those components are components that are not going to add to our vulnerability in terms of cyber. And so what we've done is the private sector, the utility companies, the utility sector, they have partnered with us to say, look, here's where we've got problems. Here's where we need to coordinate. Here's the kind of equipment we want to put on. Do you think that's okay? Should we have that evaluated to make sure that it's safe? That kind of relationship is what we're encouraging, not just in the utility sector, but also like in the gas and oil sector.
We know the importance of clean energy to the Biden administration, and we've obviously seen fairly significant growth in this area over the last decade or two. Still a long way to go in this area. So where do you think we are in terms of the development of clean energy as a real vital component to our energy mix here in the United States.
Well, you saw a couple of weeks ago, the UN issued a report, and it's code red for humanity in terms of climate change, how we have got to significantly boost our renewable energy and clean energy on our transmission grid. And we've got to add that capacity on the grid to ensure that we can make it integrate into our electricity sector. So if we want to electrify our transportation sector, for example, vehicles, you want to have electric vehicles, those have got to be plugged in, and that electricity's got to come from the grid. We want to make sure it's clean electricity. We have to actually almost double the capacity of our national grid to be able to do this. We have to make sure that that capacity is resilient, and we have to make sure that we continue to incentivize these utilities to take on the clean energy that we need. Last year was the biggest year on record for wind installations. A report just came out this week saying that. It's a huge expansion of solar as well, but we need to get significantly more. And by the way, if we do this, I mean, you're talking to me from an entity, the Wharton Business School. This is a huge business opportunity. Yeah. It's a $23 trillion global market by 2030 for the products that are going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. $23 trillion. Now that is a huge market. And the question is the United States going to get in the game, or are we going to stand by and allow our economic competitors to corner that market? And this president, the Biden administration, says, listen, we got to build those products here and the supply chains here. We have to have public-private partnerships to make them competitive globally so that we can stamp them made in America, use them here, and then export them.
Is there space then with the structure of the energy sector right now? And obviously there's a lot of important companies that are involved in this, but is there a landscape available for entrepreneurs to be able to find a path and be able to develop ideas and be able to bring forward that thought process, that next level that's going to get us to those points that you just mentioned?
Yeah, for sure there is. I mean, first of all, we need to solve still a lot of problems related to the clean energy sector. So for example, we have to get grid level, utility scale energy storage of clean energy, and we aren't there in terms of cost yet. So we need the best minds thinking about how we're going to reduce the cost of utility scale storage so that we can put wind and solar on the grid and then dispatch it whenever we need it. Those kinds of problems require entrepreneurs, requires research, development, deployment, demonstration. It requires the whole spectrum. We've got a big investment in the federal government in something called ARPA-E, which is our Advanced Research Projects Agency for Energy, which incentivizes these entrepreneurs who've got great ideas to be able to help take that idea to scale. We also provide loans through our loan program office to great ideas to be able to take those ideas to scale. So we need that partnership with entrepreneurs. And by the way, there are so many technologies, so many areas that we need the benefit of that wisdom that if I were an entrepreneur, if I were a young person coming out of school, I would totally move into the clean energy arena because it is hot.
Who knows? You may be seeing it from the Wharton School coming up in the next couple of years. We're talking with U.S. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm. Obviously, then this ties into another discussion, which is important, is around EVs. And you having your background being in Michigan, you know the importance of the auto sector to trying to build this out right now. The auto sector is one component to this. The infrastructure piece on EVs is another part. And just, being here in the Philadelphia area, my neighborhood grocery store has just been in the process of installing 2 charging stations there. It's not so much the amount, I think, sometimes of the infrastructure that we're putting in, but it's where you find it. In some of these places where it's maybe not first of thought, but it becomes even more important. The grocery stores, the movie, there's more opportunities to be able to build this out.
Yeah, right now, there are private companies that are doing the building out of these charging stations, but they build them out, of course, where they can have a return on their investment. And often that is in areas that have higher end populations who might be able to afford electric vehicles. So we want to be able to, the Biden administration is really focused on making sure that people have access to charging stations, no matter where they're living or where they're traveling. So right now we have a gap, for example, in lower income communities, in those spaces where we need to provide charging. We have a gap on freeways and highways. If you want to go long distances, you want to be able to charge up, even though those charging stations aren't used all the time. The knowledge that they're there, that you don't have range anxiety when you drive, is really important. So part of that bipartisan infrastructure bill will help to fund 250,000 charging stations in areas where we need to fill in the gaps to be able to encourage people to buy electric vehicles.
It has to be pretty good, the feeling for you to see the auto industry trying to do the part that they can in
Love
terms
it.
of developing new vehicles and making the shift, because I think that's the biggest part of it.
Yeah, I mean, think about this. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, the auto industry stood side by side with the president, saying that by 2030, half of their new vehicle sales will be electric. Half of their fleets will be electric. That is, I mean, for me, I say this as a former governor of Michigan, I was governor when our auto industry was going through bankruptcy, because we were getting challenged, of course, by not just the financial crisis, but the challenge and competition from Japanese imports, et cetera. We had to think about, are we going to allow this? Are we going to do the same old, or are we going to move in a new direction? So we built car 1.0. We want to build car 2.0. And that means the guts to car 2.0, which is the electric vehicle battery, which is a whole nother industry that the bipartisan infrastructure bill incentivizes. I'm telling you, there's all kinds of jobs for all kinds of people in all pockets of the country. And that means all kinds of potential business opportunities for entrepreneurs as well. But the electric vehicle and the trajectory of growth for those vehicles, that's very exciting.
You touched on this next topic a moment ago, but around climate change is obviously a component of this as well. And being here in Philadelphia, we just went through the remnants of Hurricane Ida. And obviously we have, for people that are listening to us, a lot of schools shut down, a lot of business shut down, might be a day, 2, 3 days. But again, in the scope of what we've been through with the pandemic, it's just adding on another layer of angst. But in terms of building out the energy sector, the reason why in part you're doing that is because of the impact of climate change.
It's a huge part of why we're doing this. Absolutely. I mean, we've seen climate change is here. There is no doubt. We're seeing it all around. I mean, Hurricane Ida is just one. I mean, every region of the country has seen an impact. You're seeing these droughts in the West, the wildfires that are just seemingly perpetual. All of these are results of climate change. The farmers in the middle of the country who are experiencing a drought, such a long-term drought, that they are contemplating whether they want to even stay in farming because they can't see an end to it. So yes, climate change is here. This is why, honestly, what the president is proposing in the Build Back Better agenda, to make sure that we build out a renewable and clean electricity grid. His goal is to get 100% clean electricity by 2035 and a net zero carbon economy by 2050. So that is all in response to what we need to do, not just us as a country, but obviously other nations as well. And that's why we want to put ourselves in a position of leadership so we can exhort other countries to do the same.